part 2 of my video on me being critical of the media and their abdicating their responsibility to inform the public. And the media has failed us over and over again. And sometimes it's even MSNBC. Now, the Soul Bloom podcast had Stephanie Ruhle on. And I saw an article about this first. And I'm sitting there like, all right, and I saw what they said. I'm like, this is completely bonkers. And then in the Facebook group that I saw this, I was like, I basically gave my full-on rant on, like, the media. I have a problem with Lawrence O'Donnell, with how he said Trump wasn't going to, run for president back in 2015, 2016, and he did, because Lawrence O'Donnell was wrong. How Lawrence O'Donnell was wrong about why there's a subset of people who voted for Trump who also voted for abortion rights. They're crazy, but I don't know, whatever. You had Alex Wagner, who didn't know what the manosphere was. Like, hello, where have you been the last 10, 20 years? The manosphere is a big, dangerous, scary thing that needs to be fought, but you don't know what it is. Where have you been? And now we've got Stephanie Ruhle on this podcast, and we are going to see what she has to say, and we're going to give critiques on this. And again, show why the media is failing to what their responsibilities are to inform. And this one, they're talking about the role of rage in the media algorithm or what have you. And this is this segment. We're not gonna watch the whole part with Stephanie Ruhle, but this is the part that I think should be focused on.
Is, in my opinion, the last line of defense of holding power accountable.
Then she said the media. The media is that picture's great. The media is the last line of defense for holding the people in power accountable. Then why aren't y'all doing your job? Because y'all are not defending. Y'all are not. Y'all are abdicating your responsibilities. Y'all are, playing nice, cozy, pulling punches, etc. when you should be doing the exact opposite.
Right? And you had a bit of a perfect storm, right? President Trump won, and tons of people were shocked or angry or frustrated, and they're tuning out. And at the same time, you have the Elon Musk media machine, because they want you to leave traditional.
No, nobody need to see Elon Musk's belly button. Like, I don't need to see his midriff. Come on.
Media, and they want you to go to X, which is a bastion of misinformation, where there is no fact checking. So it's a perfect storm of people saying, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm tuning out, I'm disconnecting. And then you have a force.
But the reason they're disconnecting is not because Trump won. Trump won as part of a symptom of the cause, which is that y'all didn't do your responsibility. Y'all didn't inform the public. Y'all sit there and try and play fact checker. Y'all sit there and try and, play fact checker. And I say play fact checker instead of being fact checkers, because playing fact checker means you do things like, oh, Project 2025 is going to do this, these three things. And if the third thing I say is what will happen if you do 1 and 2. So if you do 1 and you do 2, 3 happens. And then we say 1, 2, and 3 are going to happen because of Project 2025. And then the fact checkers go, well, it doesn't say 3 is going to happen. Well, yeah, you have to use your brain and follow the trail and follow what it is that they're going to do. And understand that there are logical conclusions that can be reached by looking at the documents, by looking at what they say and saying, well, if we do this, if we allow them to do this, this is going to happen. Like the NOAA. NOAA is going to go away if Project 2025 is enacted. And I'm like, well, they're like, no, it doesn't say that. No, it doesn't say that they want to get rid of the NOAA, but the end result of what they want to do to the NOAA will make it like it doesn't exist whatsoever. Let's continue.
Pushing it. But even.
And look, there are people on MSNBC who are still trusted, like Rachel Maddow, who I still would watch, and I will watch the other people as well. I just get more and more frustrated because I'll hear them say things, and I'm like, no, that's not right. And they'll keep failing and failing and failing. And I know they say keep failing until you succeed, and that's the best way to accomplish things. But no, you need to try and at least not fail.
Even in the last 2 weeks, what we need to do is just cover what's happening in America, right? We have to cover Democrats trying to figure out what their lane is and how they're going to get back on their feet, and we have to simply cover what this White House is doing. And
yes, please do it. Are you doing it? You've done a piss poor of a job so far because you did a piss poor of a job. I'm not saying you, Stephanie Ruhle, specifically. I'm saying MSNBC as a whole, CNN as a whole, the entire media as a whole failed to do the job. Because if they did their job correctly, if the media did their job correctly, which is simply telling facts and not whimpering and pulling punches or trying to be fair, fairness doesn't come into play if you're actually going to report. If you're going to report something like 20 things bad against Trump and one thing against Biden, they complain, oh, you report your lopsided coverage. But Trump's going to do 20 bad things compared to Biden's one. So of course Trump's going to get more negative media coverage because Trump is a more negative person. Just like the whole argument of, oh, the courts are fair, they're unfair to me. The courts are treating me very unfairly because they're ruling against him. Well, they're ruling against you because you're breaking the frickin' law. And as Pam Bondi says,
no one is above the law in this country.
Well, they shouldn't be, but you are allowing them to be above the law. Let's continue.
I think if we do that, right, there's that saying, trust is gained in raindrops and it's lost in buckets. And it's not yes, you're not in.
Yeah. I mean, that's correct because you lost a lot of the trust from me and other people when you failed to report accurately, when you as the media as a whole fail to report accurately, when you do things that pander to the horrible people. I mean, you have the young TERFs who became turfy, who started spouting, anti-trans rhetoric and also agreed with the ruling on the Supreme Court about affirmative action. What the hell's that about? They're supposed to be progressives and they're doing that? No, F you. No. Let's continue.
Incorrect that the media has lost trust.
This is where I would push back. When I see this kind of insight and passion being directed at the current administration and the lack of this kind of insight and passion being directed at the previous administration, where, again, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking...
He's doing the same thing I'm doing. That's hysterical. Again, this is the first time I'm watching this video in and of itself. I didn't know where, I had to go find it, but this is the first time I'm watching this video. I just read some clips, read some bits and pieces from it from an article, so I didn't know exactly what all they said. Let's see.
About left-leaning news media organizations were kind of like, la, 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 everything's fine. Look, the environment's, look, the economy's great, la, 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 immigration's not that much of a problem. And really being Cleopatra, queen of denial. Thank you. Boom.
Ba-dum-bum, as we were talking about drummers earlier. Robin, they never pan to sit who at the head of the table, making the ego strokers focus on the middle of the table. Who is the head of the table? Roman Reigns? Sorry. Wrestling fan, but thank you, Robin, for the super chat. Appreciate you.
I would push back on immigration. I can specifically remember when Greg Abbott of Texas and Ron DeSantis of Florida sent those buses of migrants to different cities, different parts of the country, which ended up being politically genius for both of them. Mm-hmm. The media regularly talked about the fact that Biden was not doing enough in his first 2.5 years on immigration, even though in the last.
What was he supposed to do when the Senate would block him, when Republicans would try and block him every step of the way? Again, this is why the media sucks, because you can't. Biden tried to do things. He tried to do things, and the Senate blocked him. And then when he lost the House blocked him. Come on.
Last year and a half, you're seeing the numbers go down. He just wasn't doing enough. And you saw it in how people voted, right? You had places like the Bronx, you had places like New Jersey, people who said, I'm not happy with immigration in this country. And that's why Democrats are...
But you're blaming the wrong people. Could Biden have done some things better? Sure, absolutely. But you blame Biden and you don't blame the Republican obstructionist. Because that's what always happens. That's what the media always frickin' does. The media will sit here and they will tell you, oh, here's where a Democrat screwed up minorly and therefore we're going to harp on them. Meanwhile, the conservatives do what the conservatives do, and the media's like, oh, that's just conservatives being conservatives. They're giving what Biden is doing or didn't do undue weight. Meanwhile, they're just giving the Republicans a pass for being frickin' obstructionists. Again, not everybody. There are some people who would focus in on the Republican obstructionism and how terrible it was. And we did hear about it a little bit, but the voters we're hearing the dialogue. We're hearing like what, Trump says constantly. I mean, he throws so many lies out there about immigration, about the people coming across the border, about the amount of people coming across the border. You have the Republican Party as a whole who would criticize the Biden administration because of the amount of fentanyl that they stopped coming into this country. They stopped more fentanyl than Trump ever did. And the GOP were like, well, that just means they're coming across the border with fentanyl. No, he's stopping it. But the media didn't do a good enough job fighting back against the lies of the GOP, the lies of Donald Trump, the lies of these people who are being bigots and trying to fearmonger you into the big scary people who are coming across the border. Because Trump in 2015, 2016, whatever he first said, it was like, they're sending criminals, they're sending murderers and rapists across the border. They're not sending it. There may have been some in those groups. I mean, clearly the one who murdered Laken Riley. Yes, he came across the border. I'm sure he came across the border maybe during the Biden administration. Maybe. I don't know. The one who he deported, Garcia, was here during Trump's first administration. He did nothing about that then. Anyway, let's continue.
Scrambling to recalibrate now, but I do think that was covered. And I interviewed.
You do think it was covered, but it wasn't covered right. It wasn't covered properly. It wasn't covered to inform the voters well enough that all this bullshit that Donald Trump is saying is bullshit. Again, the last clip, in clip number 1 that we were talking about with ABC, he just trusts the numbers coming from the administration about the number of encounters. Why? Why are the numbers low? Are they low because they're not crossing, or are they low because Donald Trump's administration is making a choice to not go after them? And maybe he might do some strategically to give the optics that he's doing something, but in reality, they're not. I don't believe those numbers. I don't believe the amount of encounters. Not one bit. And then they're taking people like somebody who was had a mental disability who asked a Border Patrol officer how to get back to where he was, who couldn't read properly, and the guy arrested him because he didn't have his papers. Because they target citizens. They don't care if you're a citizen or not. I'm surprised that guy didn't get deported. Fortunately, he didn't.
Vice President Harris in September, and I remember asking her, I said, nobody's eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio. Mm-hmm. However, there are lots of people who live there.
Nobody's eating cats and dogs, however. That's brushing off the lie and allowing the bigots to run the story. Like, what Game of Thrones, everything before the word but is a lie. And however is just a fancy but.
There who aren't happy with the amount of immigrants who have moved there, legally or not, because now their hospitals are stretched and their schools are stretched. And
well, that's an infrastructure issue that has to be dealt with by government, with hospitals being stretched or whatever. But again, they don't care if they're here legally or illegally, which means they're bigots. And you're pandering to bigots. You're pandering to bigotry. You're willing to sit there and pander to them. You're a pander bear.
And that's the same thing in tons of communities in the country. What do you say to that?
What you say to them is you give them the facts. You tell them why what Donald Trump is doing is not only wrong factually, but wrong morally, wrong ethically. You explain to them, you show them why his eating the dogs, eating the cats thing is only done to rile up the racists. And you're never going to convince the people who are like one step away from being in the Klan if they're not already there. Those people are lost. Those people are never going to vote for Democrats. Those people are always going to vote for Republicans because that's where their home is. Their home is in the Republican Party. But what you can do is get the people who are being swayed by them. The people who are just like, and look, being wishy-washy and, that sort of moderate or whatever, that sort of centrist. Not all centrists are bad, but those people who are like both sides have bad, the whataboutism type folks. The ones who are like, yeah, the Democrats are doing that, but so are the Republicans, so there's no difference. But the bad of the Democrats is like significantly less than the bad of the Republicans. but they view it as the same, man.
I remember her answer was, well, we had this immigration bill and Donald Trump blocked it. And she's right. So there's nothing to put, she's right. Donald Trump did block the bill, but that doesn't address how people in the country feel. And just,
well, then you need to address it in the way, but while explaining to them that it's Donald Trump that was responsible for not allowing Joe Biden to pass this bill because he didn't want to solve the any immigration problems that we were having during the Biden administration, because then he wouldn't have anything to run on. And you need to explain that to them. And again, you're not going to get the deplorables. You're not going to get the people who, are lost. There's probably a good 30% of this country that's just lost at this point. And you need to make sure it's not more. And you're failing to do that.
Just getting mired in, well, we tried to pass this thing and it didn't happen. What Republicans have been successful at, and they
is a con.
Have not solved any of these issues for the American people, but they're willing to say some of the not ugly, they're willing to talk.
Yes, ugly. Yes, they're willing to say ugly things. Ugly, horrible, deplorable, mean, unethical, immoral, racist, bigoted things. They are willing to say all those things in order to get elected because they don't give a shit as long as they get power.
Talk about some of the unpleasant things that people feel. That when people say those things out loud, they're immediately called, xenophobic or racist.
Yeah.
And
oh no, I called a bigot a bigot. I'm such a terrible person. Boo-hoo. Boo-hoo. I called a racist a racist. I called somebody who was a xenophobe. How dare me? How dare me be honest? How dare me challenge people? Can the Democrats do a better job of expressing their opinions to not force people who are not those ways, to not force them into that way? Sure. But again, you're not going to win the bigots. You're not going to win the xenophobes. You're going to win the other people who might be frustrated with, things like, oh, the hospitals are overrun and we don't have enough services to handle the community. And they're mad about that. And then they listen to the conservatives and they say, oh, well, the problem is the people eating the dogs and the cats. And then you're like, okay, well, let's vote for the Republicans then, even though they're voting against their best interests.
And we have to make space for how people feel.
No. We do not have to make space for bigots. And this was the thing that made me go through this video. We do not have to make spaces for bigots, for racists, for xenophobes, for those people. There's no room. We should not have any tolerance of those people. To tolerate those people is to give them tacit approval to act that way. By giving them a space, you're giving them power that they don't deserve to have. You're allowing the Republicans to get away with their bullshit, with their racism, with their xenophobia, with their bigotry, etc. They don't deserve a space. Maybe they deserve to be thrown into space, but they don't deserve a space. And you sit here, this is why the media is failing us. Because they're sitting here saying, oh, we have to make a space for the people who feel this way. No. Fuck you. This is why I'm berating the media constantly. Well, not constantly. I berate the Trump administration constantly, but I have a significant amount of time that I spend talking about the failures of the media, how the media has failed. I'm sounding like Trump now. The media has failed to, inform the public. The media has failed to do their job. They've abdicated their responsibilities. And they just bite because, we have to give them space. We have to let them feel the way that they feel, because if we don't, we're bad people. No, they're the bad people. Don't be a coward. I guarantee you that if you stood up and called them bigots loudly, more loudly, shamed them into the corner, if you did that, more marginalized and oppressed people would come out and vote for you, or us, or the left, or the liberals, or the Democrats, or whatever. If you came out and you do this kind of bullshit, you do this crap right here, that's going to make people not want to vote for you or at all. Because they're going to sit there, well, the Republicans are terrible and deplorable. Oh, but the liberals, they're going to give people the space. They're going to make space for the people who are bigots. So why would a marginalized and oppressed person, why would somebody from a marginalized and oppressed culture come out and vote and be like enthusiastic? Yeah, I'm going to vote for the Democrats, even though the Democrats are giving the bigots the space to say what they want to say. They're not going to do that. That's what causes people to say both sides are the same, man. Because you have people like this who are wishy-washy, who are going to make excuses as to what. No. If you come out strong, if you come out firm against bigotry, against racism, you have a zero tolerance policy, not just for racism, but for racist, not just for bigotry, but against bigots. If you come out strongly and firmly and show the people from marginalized and oppressed cultures that you're going to stand up for them, you're going to fight for them, and fight against the people that are being deplorable, you will get more people out voting and you'll win more elections by standing firm on the principles you believe in. And the principles that we believe in shouldn't include giving the people who are bigots some space to say what it is they want to say. No.
Do you know what I'm saying?
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
100%. I know what you're saying. I know what she's saying too. And what she's saying is why we lose. It's a bunch of malarkey.
My mom and dad live in New Jersey.
Most people, a large majority of people who have a problem with the current immigration crisis and have for the last 5 or 10 years are not racist, but often.
And again, can we do a better job with our messaging? I've always said that the Democratic Party needs better wordsmiths. But the people who are if you come out and call certain people bigots and racists because they're being bigots and racists, and the other people who are trying to think, oh, you have to explain to them why these people's opinions are wrong, why these people's opinions are dangerous, and why you shouldn't go with them. And all the other reasons that have nothing to do with immigration as well. Immigration can't be the only issue. You have to show them why their wallets are going to hurt because of the Republican policy. You have to show them all the other reasons why. You have to show them why the immigration crisis or whatever is not a crisis. You have to explain to them why the Republicans are making mountains out of molehills. You have to explain to them why they're inflating and giving undue weight to these problems and trying to paint all immigrants like, murderers of Lake and Riley, when there's no evidence. There was somebody on some thread that I was talking on, and they were like, well, in the last 4 years or whatever, 14,000 people were murdered by illegal people who were here illegally. There's no such thing as an illegal people, but that's their words that they use. And I went and looked up the crime statistics. Nowhere near 14,000. It was no more than 300, maybe 400. It was a very small number. The amount of people who committed murders amongst all of the people who were here in violation of our border policies, or who they would call illegal, including people who are here legally because they're asking for asylum, the amount of people that are doing that, the percentage of people, the per capita count of people who commit murders versus the people who are here in that class of people who are not citizens, who are undocumented or whatever, is much less. That number is much smaller than the amount of U.S. citizens per capita who commit the same crime, who commit murder. Because most of the people who are undocumented don't want to, bring attention to themselves because they know they're here and they're risking their freedom by staying here, by working jobs that nobody else wants to work and picking the crops and washing the dishes and whatever it is that these companies want to hire undocumented workers for, because when they hire an undocumented worker, they can pay them slave wages. Right? But those people don't want to draw attention to themselves. Most of them just want to live their lives and, work some money and maybe send some money back home. Oh well. That doesn't harm me at all in any bit whatsoever. And that's what most of these people are. Hardworking people who just want a better shot at life. And so have some taken shortcuts? Sure. I'm not going to judge them for taking shortcuts to support their family if those shortcuts don't harm people. I'm more afraid of domestic white terrorists than I am about persons who are here undocumented. So you have to explain to those people where they're at. You have to explain to them, the people who are reachable. You explain to them why the Republicans are manufacturing this crisis, why they're lying about these numbers, that they're inflating the crimes that are being done by people who are here who are undocumented. Explain to them why the information that is being sold to them is wrong. And then you act strongly to the people who are giving the bad information, who are being racist, who are being bigots. And then that's going to get out the bunch of people who see both parties are the same, man. More people on the left will come out and support you because you're being strong. You're strongly attacking the bigotry and the racism.
Kind of tarred as racist by the liberal left.
I will tell you, if you go on the internet, people there's loads of clips that will come after me.
I heard about this internet thing. What is it?
After the election, I had not a debate, but a conversation with a friend of mine who was on the show. And I was making the point that I do not think Donald Trump's win means that half the country's racist. I don't believe that. This person really, really came.
I mean, I just said before, 30%. There might be 20% who are being hoodwinked by the administration to think, oh, the reason we're having these infrastructure problems, like not enough hospital beds, not enough this, not enough that, not enough resources, the reason we're having this, the Republicans will say, the reason we're having this is because of illegal immigration, and then they believe them. So counter that. Stand up against that, and those 20% who are voting for Trump, who are not bigoted and racist, that you want to say that they are, those 20% might be like, oh, okay, and maybe you'll get 10%, maybe get half of them. Maybe half of them will be convinced. And that's all you need. That's all we would have needed if we could have convinced a quarter of those people to not vote Trump, to understand that Trump is giving us a load of malarkey. We would have won strongly. But that's like the whole thing with Hillary Clinton. When Hillary Clinton said half of the people who are voting for Trump are deplorables. They are a basket of deplorables. You're holding up the basket or whatever. There's the meme with her holding up the basket saying, get in the basket. Hillary Clinton said half of Trump supporters are deplorables. And the Republicans, the Trump supporters, the MAGA folks said, Hillary Clinton just called all of you deplorables. I never heard anybody in the media countering that, except for me, but I'm not. At that time, I didn't even have the YouTube channel. I just started the YouTube channel much later. But at the time, I just had my Blog Talk Radio podcast. And on that Blog Talk Radio podcast, and maybe when I called into the local radio show every now and then, maybe I would say, look, she didn't say that all of y'all were deplorable. She said that half of y'all were deplorables. And if you're mad about it, as Andrew Gillum said in the governor's debate against Ron DeSantis, a hit dog will holler. So maybe the people who are crying that Hillary Clinton called half of them deplorables, those are the people who are deplorables. And the media should have said, he's not calling everybody who's currently supporting Trump a deplorable. She's calling half of them. If you're not in that half, you shouldn't be insulted. But no, they stayed quiet, they sat down, and allowed Donald Trump to run the narrative. They allowed the conservatives to run that narrative that she called all of them deplorables. That's one of the many reasons why she lost. I mean, I'll still say that she lost because of sexism. That was also another reason. She also lost because of, the 12% of the voters in Michigan, or 12% of the Democratic primary voters in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania who flipped from Bernie Sanders to Donald Trump. It's another reason why Hillary Clinton lost. If they would have just went to Jill Stein, Hillary Clinton would have won. But again, that's getting off topic. Point is, Hillary Clinton only called them, half of them, deplorables, and we allowed the Republicans, or the media allowed the Republicans to run the narrative, and then we lost. Because the media wants to be fair. No, being fair is being honest. And if being honest means you give 9 negative stories to, Donald Trump when you only gave 1 to Hillary Clinton, so what? Maybe Donald Trump does 9 times more bad stuff than Hillary. Seems reasonable. But they won't talk about that. They won't argue that.
Came at me that's easy for me to say as a white woman of privilege that the country's not racist. But I think that's a very quick way to alienate people, right?
It's also a quick way to alienate people to say that half the country isn't racist. Because your friend is right. It is a privileged stance, because if you're not part of a marginalized and oppressed class, you're not going to see it. So you have to listen to the people who are in marginalized and oppressed classes. You have to listen to them and understand why what these things that are being done are being harmful to the marginalized and oppressed. And you have to explain that to those people who are leaning to the right, who are not racist, to understand why. We've allowed them to define DEI. We've allowed them to define woke. We've allowed them to define all of these terms that are used. I have a series that's called Coming to Terms with Activism. I should do one on DEI. I should do one on woke, because the Republicans have it wrong and they lie about it. I mean, Donald Trump did correctly say that he's against diversity, equity, and inclusion. He said that clearly and loud as day. That's the one thing I agreed with him, that he does disagree with those three things. He hates those three things. At least he was honest about those three things. Yeah, Krista, it's called empathy, which the Republicans are in short supply. But Stephanie Ruhle would say, you can't say that, because if you say that the Republican Party is lacking in empathy, then you're just being mean and you're driving away. No, again, if you are somebody who's not lacking of empathy, who is a Republican, and you hear somebody saying Republicans lack empathy, that's not about you. It's like the whole thing where people are like, men are this, men are that, men are trash, men do this, men do that. Do I get offended and upset when they say that? No. That's one of the things I do address in my Coming to Terms with Activism playlist. Because, like, the first time I heard the term toxic masculinity, I was just like, what? Toxic masculinity? Or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't toxic masculinity. It was male fragility. Male fragility was the one. The first time I heard the term male fragility, I was like, what? Male fragility? What about being a male makes me fragile? There's nothing about being a male that makes... Maybe I am. It took me that quick to realize maybe I am. Maybe I do have some fragility in me. And maybe that's something that I need to work on personally. But if you are not a fragile male, then when they talk about male fragility, they're not talking about you. If you hear the terms toxic masculinity doesn't mean that all masculinity is toxic. Toxic masculinity means that there's these societal pressures that are put on men for us to behave in a toxic way. And guess what? We do have that. And I try to live my best life. I try to live my life in a way that does not promote toxicity as it upholds the patriarchal standards that we have in this society. And when somebody talks about toxic masculinity, I don't get offended, because I know they're not talking about me. And if for some reason they were talking about me, I'll take the criticism and I'll try and better myself. Because I like to think that I do have empathy. I do want to think about other people and how they feel. But, yeah, Stephanie Ruhle is coming from a place of privilege when she makes that argument. They're not all racist. And here's the other point that I've made consistently on this podcast. That what is the moral difference between somebody who votes for Donald Trump because they like his bigotry, xenophobia, racism, etc., and somebody who is willing to vote for Donald Trump? They might say that they don't agree with those policies, but they're still voting for him. They're still letting him get elected. They're still helping him get elected. What's the moral difference? This is why in the first video on this series of two videos, this is why in that first video, I said I'm using the words, collaborator, more liberally, more broadly than the dictionary might do it, because I'm including the people who are bystanders. I'm including the people who might not actively help, but are still helping because they're not standing up against it. And the media is being complicit and are being these collaborators because they're wanting to be fair. Again, fairness doesn't mean you give people equal criticism. Fairness means you give people criticisms when they're due, regardless of who they are, which is why when Democrats do things that are wrong, I will criticize a Democrat on this podcast. But comparatively, the wrongs done by Democrats and the wrongs done by Republicans, the Republican wrongs offset the Democratic wrongs by like a factor of 10 to 1, at least. That's being conservative. It's probably much higher. Let's continue. Krista, were you here earlier for that? You said if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. Were you here earlier? Because if you were not, you're still great, because I said that earlier too.
I grew up in New Jersey, and I can tell you that when lots of people in New Jersey now drive over the bridge and it costs, I can't remember because I have Easy Pass, I think $16. And when they hear stories that migrants who live here get a cell phone, or they get to live in they get to stay in a hotel, that infuriates people, because we are living in this moment where, not a moment, in general, everybody wants to feel like life is fair. And right now, lots of different groups of people feel like it's good for this group.
Life isn't fair. Life is not one bit fair. Not one bit. Not at all. And if somebody's complaining that life isn't fair, as Dennis Leary would say, get a fucking helmet.
It's good for that group, but it's unfair to me. And I think with the immigration crisis,
yeah, it's unfair to that group that is currently, if you're in that group, i.e. like, Latinx folks, Latinas, Latinos, Latinx, if you're in that group, you're risking getting deported just because of who you are, regardless of if you're a citizen or not. And you have people who are complaining that they can't use a hotel room because somebody who's undocumented is using a hotel room. So the occupancy of hotels are, limited. So you might not be able to go on vacation, or might not be able to pick the hotel you might want to go. Oh no, life is so unfair. Boo-hoo. Meanwhile, citizens are getting deported. Citizens are getting deported. We've deported a citizen, at least one, probably more. Because I don't trust this administration. If one happened, it happened more than once. And it will happen again, over and over and over again. That's unfair. That's the fairness. That's the unfairness that we should be tackling. Not your inability to get a hotel room because of higher occupancy or because of the fact that we've put some undocumented folks in hotels. I'm sure they don't want to live in hotels. I'm sure they'd like to live in a better place than a hotel. Someplace with a working kitchen, maybe? But hey, I can't go to the hotel that I want. Life is so unfair. Grow up. Get a spine. Deal with it.
We as a country or political leaders didn't give enough space to people who say, they're not necessarily anti-immigrant, but they're saying, I'm American. I was born here. I went to school here. I work here.
I was born here. Being born here doesn't make you American. Because there are plenty of people who were not born here who are Americans because they were naturalized citizens. So if you're going to say I was born here, no, that's not a valid argument. And there are other people who are here who are not citizens, but who are legal residents, who want to build a life in this country. You're discounting them too. Because you are giving these people space. Space is the final frontier. And they don't deserve it. If they're going to be bigoted, if they're going to tacitly support a bigoted president.
Taxes. I cannot make ends meet.
Yeah, Terry Taylor, immigration crisis. What is she talking about? Exactly. That's the point. That's my point the whole time. You have to go to them and explain to them why it's not a crisis. Oh, the crisis at the border. Whatever. It's not a crisis at the border. The crisis at the border was Greg Abbott putting barbed wire on floating objects in the middle of the Rio Grande, so that people trying to cross the border would get injured, and then stopping people who were in the federal government during the Biden administration from going to help them and save their lives. That's a crisis. It's a crisis of morality. It's a crisis of decency. It's a crisis of, losing who we should be as a nation. I'm not going to say who we are, because as a nation, we've been terrible. We have a history of being terrible. But it's a crisis of who we should be. The idea that anybody would think it's moral, proper, don't even say legal. Even though it wasn't legal, it shouldn't be considered legal because Greg Abbott, Ron DeSantis, no governor has any authority over immigration because the Constitution specifically gives that authority to the federal government, and the 10th Amendment clearly says that powers not given to the federal government are the power, or restricted from the states, are powers that the states have. But since immigration naturalization policy, since the ability, the power to control our borders is up to the federal government, it's not a power that the states have. So Greg Abbott had no authority. And he should have been arrested for the actions that he did, not just putting, the barbed wire on, floating booms or whatever in the middle of the river so that people will get sliced up by the sharp razor under the water so they don't even see it, and they get harmed, they get cut, they get hurt, they risk death crossing a river just to make a better life for themselves. That was illegal. But them shipping the people to all those different areas, she called them a genius for doing that, for shipping people. DeSantis, Abbott were geniuses for shipping people to Martha's Vineyard and other places. They had no authority to do that. They should have been arrested for the human trafficking. That should have been considered human trafficking. Misleading people into thinking where they were going, sending them somewhere else, kidnapping them, and bringing them across state lines. That's human trafficking. Anybody who was in the administration of Florida for DeSantis or for Texas and Abbott who participated, who were just following orders, should have all been arrested for crimes against humanity, for their crimes of human trafficking, and for violating the Constitution and exceeding their authority and usurping authority that they don't have. That's what should have been done. Let's continue.
Because you're seeing the middle class get squeezed and squeezed, and they're pointing to other groups that are getting support from the government and the people.
And this is what the wealthy do. The wealthy says, okay, the middle class is getting squeezed, and especially the Republicans. The wealthy Republicans will say, the middle class is getting squeezed, and it's the fault of the people down below you. And they'll prompt it as them being below them, not just in an economic place, but in all aspects. When in reality, they need to be looking up. Because the problem is the billionaire class, the ownership class, the millionaire class, the wealthy class, they are the ones who are putting the squeeze on the middle class. It's not a undocumented migrant, an undocumented worker, somebody seeking asylum. Those people are not the ones who are making your 401k shrink. It's Donald Trump and his bullshit tariff policies that are making your 401k shrink. It's the billionaires putting the squeeze. It's the billionaires killing the middle class. It's not giving some person who's undocumented a hotel room. But the billionaire Republicans are more than happy to let them think that, because that allows them to continue what they're doing. The Republicans will say bullshit like, oh, Biden wants to increase the size of the amount of employees in the IRS, so they're just going to go after moms and pops. They're going to go after small businesses. They're going to go after you, the small taxpayers who are, who might have a couple of $1,000s in tax debt. Now, that's not what those people were for. Half of them weren't even, people who were to investigate. Half of them were like IT people and support staff. But the other people were going to go there not to go after the poor and the middle class and the working class. No, they were there to go after the wealthy, the people who were avoiding paying millions of dollars in taxes. But again, the billionaires are more than happy to make you think that they were going after them because that allows them to get away with it. It justifies their actions in weakening the IRS so that they can get away with their crimes and not pay their fair share in taxes. Many other examples of them doing just that, of them manufacturing a crisis and then making you think that it's somebody else's fault when it's their fault. And you're sitting here and you're going to say, oh, well, we have to give them space. No, we don't have to give them anything. We have to give them the facts. We have to give them plenty of facts, and we have to give them the reasons why what they're being told by Trump and MAGA and all the crap is just a bunch of malarkey.
People they're pointing to are migrants. And we need to give space to sort of hear those people, hear what their needs are. And instead, a lot of those people have felt like when they voice their opinions, they're treated like they're xenophobic and they're racist and they're anti-immigrant.
And maybe we should give some people a single opportunity, right? Let's take, for example, Vice President Harris. Vice President Harris, her first name is Kamala. Kamala Harris. There were people who would say Kamala Harris, and that was incorrect. And there were people who were purposefully saying Kamala Harris, knowing that it was incorrect because they're racist, they're bigots, etc. So if you hear somebody saying Kamala Harris once, mispronouncing it once, sure, maybe give them one opportunity. Say, you know what, look, I understand maybe you used to watch wrestling in the 80s. Maybe you watched wrestling even earlier, like maybe in Mid-South or whatever, when the wrestler called Kamala that you got in Headhunter was around. Maybe because of that you believe that any spelling of that combination of letters is pronounced Kamala instead of Kamala. So maybe that has caused you to believe that her name is pronounced that way. And I'm just going to sit here and tell you, look, I don't think you're a racist for saying it wrong once. But I just wanted to tell you that her name is pronounced Kamala, and that a lot of times when you mispronounce people's names and you do it repeatedly, a lot of people are going to look at you and be like, well, does that person really care about people, and or that is that person being a xenophobe, a racist, a bigot, or whatever? But give them the benefit of the doubt maybe, and say this is how you correctly pronounce it. I'm just letting you know and giving you the opportunity to change, and you give them the opportunity to change. And if they don't, then they're racist and bigots, and you can rightly call them out. So sure, maybe give people an opportunity to prove themselves to not be bigots. But when they continuously act in a bigoted way, when they continuously back bigots, when it's been shown that they are bigots, then what's the moral difference between, again, actively supporting bigotry and voting for a bigot because you allowed him to con you? I see no moral difference in the two. And in reality, to the marginalized and oppressed people who are harmed by the policies of Donald Trump, those people don't see the difference either. They can't afford to work between, which one of these people? Muhammad Ali had a great comment. Muhammad Ali had a great comment that he was trying to explain where somebody asked him, I think it might have been Dick Cavett or whatever. Maybe I'm wrong about the name, but he was he was being interviewed, and they were like, why do you not trust white people as a whole? And he was like, let me give you an example. There may very well be some good, cobras or whatever, some good rattlesnakes who are not going to hurt me. But if I see a bunch of rattlesnakes coming down the hallway, am I going to sit here and try and figure out which ones are the good ones and which ones are the bad ones? Or am I going to shut the door and prevent all of them from getting to me? So the people who are in marginalized and oppressed cultures don't have the time to try and parse which one of the people wearing red hats are the people who are the actual racists, and which ones are the people who are, just there, who are not really racist, but they're still voting for him. They're still wearing the red hats. They're still hearing him say all the deplorable things and are still voting for him. Do they have the time is it worth it for them to try and parse that out and figure out which one of them are reachable and which one of them are not? Do they have the time to figure out which one of those have the opportunity to be reached? No, because their lives and their livelihoods and their way of life is at risk because you're electing a xenophobic bigot. So no, they don't have that. They don't have that privilege to do that. You, Stephanie Ruhle, may very well have the privilege to determine, try and figure out, and these ones are the good ones. These ones are the not good ones. Let's make space to try and figure that whole thing out. You might have that privilege to be able to do that. You may have the ability to do that. A lot of people don't. It's like me. I'm mostly privileged. I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish and I'm fat. That's where I don't have privilege. There's such a thing as size privilege. There's such a thing as, Christian privilege. If you're Jewish, you're in a marginalized and oppressed group. Even if you're not specifically, even if you don't feel marginalized and oppressed, you are always at risk for people who are Nazis to come after you, for one. And it's very easy for the people who aren't Jewish to sit here and tell me, we don't have concentration camps built in this country yet. We don't have, they're not walking around with swastikas yet. Do I have the time to sit around and wait? Do I have the luxury to sit around and wait and allow it to happen? Or do I point out now that they're doing all the bullshit that Nazis were doing in the 1930s to try and make sure that we don't get to the 1940 Nazi versions? But the opinion of Stephanie Ruhles of the world would try and tell me, you have to give these people space because, even though they're voting for people who are doing the same things that Hitler did, you can't offend them. You have to care about their feelings. I care about my life. I care about the life of myself and my family. I care about the lives of other people who these Nazis would go after. I don't have the luxury to try and parse out which one of the MAGA supporters are not real Nazis. I don't have the time to parse that out at all. I don't have the luxury to parse that out. I mean, I may be able to pass as somebody who's not Jewish, but it's out there that I'm Jewish. Can't unring that bell. You can go look at, places I've gone to school and be like, there's another Jew. There you go. Send him on the train. Send him on the train, if that ever gets to that. And even if they don't do it to Jews, they'll do it to Muslims. That's what Donald Trump in the first term. He campaigned on a total and complete ban of Muslims entering this country. And the Nazi apologists are like, that's not what he implemented. Who cares? He campaigned on it. He campaigned on bigotry and xenophobia. I don't have the luxury to sit there and be like, he didn't quite do this. It's not exactly this. Lives are at stake. But Stephanie Ruhle wants us to make space. Fuck that.
And I don't think they are.
A lot of people have come on this show and talked about the toxic relationship to social media, the dangers it screens, the mental health connection to screens and to news and to doom scrolling, because we all know that what gets clicks, what gets people turning back in after the commercial, next up after the commercial,
Hey.
Are your carpets killing you? I know that's more of a local news thing, right? And I get it. But so many people have come on this show, I can't even tell you, half our guests, and said, I don't watch the news anymore, and my life is so much better. I turn it off. I took Apple News off my phone.
Ignorance is bliss. And there are some people who are very happy.
I don't even subscribe. I don't go on social media, and I don't read news articles, and I'm raising bees and growing poppies and, washing my dishes and meditating, and my life is so much better and richer for it. So I know you've got a strong answer to that.
I think you said the most important thing. Richer. That's a very rich thing to say, because
she finally understands privilege for once in this whole entire interview that we've watched.
People of privilege can afford to tune out. Do you know what I'm saying? And I think that, just this weekend, I was at NBA All-Star, and I participated.
People who are richer than. And just this weekend, I was at the NBA All-Star game. What? Come on. Give me a break.
In a conversation where someone said, listen, the two-party system doesn't work. That's fair. I buy that. Let's have Elon Musk go in there. Let's shake it up and let's see how things work out. In theory, I totally hear that. But let's.
Who's going to be hurt?
That's exactly the.
Who's going to suffer?
That's exactly
when the
thing.
social safety net.
And they make that point, but that they can't understand the other side, the rest of it. Like, how can you make that point right there and understand that point, but not understand why the rest of the stuff you're saying is harmful? You understand that people have the privilege to be able to tune out the news, but you can't understand why people don't have the privilege to be able to try and figure out which one of the Trump supporters are really Nazis and which ones are really not. Cognitive dissonance is ridiculous. And this is why I'm critical of the media. This is why I say we need more and new media. We need to support shows, not just mine, but we need to support a whole bunch of new shows that are going to give valid commentary about the social issues of the day, who are not going to sit here and be all wishy-washy. Because if we're wishy-washy, we're going to continue to lose. The only way to win is by being stronger, by standing up firmly against bigotry and racism. Because again, we might not, even if we don't get any of those people to change their minds, we'll get the people who don't vote to change their minds. We'll get the people who have given up on the system maybe come back and say, hey, these group of people are actually standing up and saying the right things and doing the right, not just saying the right things, but doing the right things and standing up against evil. So we can come out and support that. And you'll do better in elections because you'll be getting more turnout. The thing with the Republican Party is they always want small turnout elections because small turnout elections tend to be whiter and older. But when you have large turnout elections, it's always better for the Democrats. So you need to do things not to convince the people who come out regularly to come over. I mean, you should. There should be reasons why everybody comes out and votes for a Democrat instead of a Republican. But you need to give the people who aren't voting the faith that you're going to do what's right for them. And while I can sit here and say, people who say the parties are the same man are not paying attention, but when the party is represented by things like this, you know what? Maybe I could see it. I mean, I still think it was silly to say that, that it would be the same with Biden versus or with Harris versus Trump, like on issues like with Gaza. Like, that's just silly. But again, if we had a stronger, progressive, leftist message of equity, of equality, diversity, of inclusion, of standing up against tyranny, standing up against evil, fascism, we would drive up turnout and we would win more elections. We might win all of them. And we wouldn't even have to absorb Canada as the 51st state to win the Electoral College every damn time. Not that Canada would ever go for it, because most of Canadians don't support that. But still, we could do it ourselves without getting the 51st state of Canada if we only were stronger and had the spine, the backbone to stand up against bigotry, against racism, against xenophobia. And give the people who have been, pushed down by our system the ability to say, oh, this is what I needed. These are the people that we needed, and these are the people that we can get behind.
That is dismantled. Who's going to suffer?
Or how about this,
Tech
right?
bros and Wall Street traders? No.
And
actors in their fancy burned down houses?
If you were to say to me, Stephanie, having a Department of Education sit in the federal government doesn't work because education has different needs in different parts of the country, I would actually buy that argument. If they said, let's make it local.
But it's not a good argument, because the idea that having a federal agency that guarantees minimum standards and that deals with issues like, allowing people to get IEP or 504 plans. If you have, intellectual or other disabilities or like physical disabilities that require you to have, certain, things in the classroom, certain, extra time in the classroom to take tests or whatever. That's not going to be enforced at a state level. I don't trust Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, to Florida, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Idaho, Wyoming. I don't trust those states to protect the folks who have disabilities and to make sure that these IEPs and 504 plans are being enforced or being protected. That's what you have the federal government for. And you also have state education boards and local school boards. And the local school boards can, under the guidance of everything else, be like, as long as you have these minimum standards, the local school boards can, deal with those. Oh, these are the needs in my community versus the needs in that community. Yeah, maybe the people in a rural area might have different educational needs when it comes to either technology or whatever than the people in New York City. Maybe there are different needs in different areas, and you can do that at the state and local level while having a Department of Education to make sure that everybody in this country has at least a minimum standard of education. So I can't see it. And that's why y'all in the media have to do a better job of explaining that to the people.
I would buy that, but they're not saying that. They're not saying, here's what the Department of Education does on a federal level.
Yeah.
We're going to take it out of Washington, and we're going to take this money
to the states,
and we're going to take it to the states. Mm-hmm. If they said that to me, I'd say, I hear you. Great. Let's see how that. Mm-hmm. But instead,
you'd say, great. Let's see how that goes. Yeah, great. Well, how are you going to unring that bell when it shows to be an absolute failure? How are you going to do that? How are you going to unbreak the egg? How are you going to unscramble the egg? How's that going to happen?
It's a bastion of fraud, waste, and I can't think of the third word, corruption. Let's just get rid of it. Mm-hmm. What if I was a parent of a special needs student? Mm-hmm. What if I was what if, right? We already know that our teachers, who are among the most valuable members of society, right? My children's teachers spend more time with my kids than I do. Mm-hmm. And year after year, we hear about more teachers that have to go to a GoFundMe so they can get school supplies for their classroom. And so the issue is, if you want to make cuts, if you want to make changes, let's do it. But let's be open with the American people. And my point is, for everyone who's like, I just want to tune out of news.
Oh, crap. Freaking ads.
Because people just voted to blow up the system. And I know the system's imperfect and you're not happy with it, but do you want it totally blown up? Because and I'm not saying it's where we're headed, but it could be. And I'm not.
It is where we're headed. They want to get rid of the Department of Education. That's where it's headed. And she's sitting there like, oh, if you want to say let's do these things and let's remove the whatever, let's do it. No, let's not do it. Let's explain to them why they're wrong. Let's explain to them why at the federal level, because the states, especially conservative states, especially southern conservative states, have shown a complete failure over the course of their history to actually care about people who are in the minority, be they minority racially, be they minority when it comes to different abilities or whatever. They've shown that they can't be trusted. And you have to fight back about this. If you want to say that there's fraud, waste, and abuse in the Department of Education, first you should have to prove that it is. Go find it. Go find it and then bring it to the American people and explain it to them. Oh, we found this example of fraud, waste, and abuse. Or abuse. We found this example. Here's why it's fraud, waste, and abuse, and here's why Congress should take action to fix it. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But they don't understand this. Like, they're getting bits and pieces of things right here, but then that all falls apart because she says things like, oh, if you want to cut the Department of Education and send all the money to the states, fine, let's do it. She's saying, fine, let's do it. No, it's dumb. Let's not do it. Let them prove to us, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there's something going on there that's fraud or waste or abuse, and then fix that. Don't cut everything. Because the solution can't be worse than the problem. The cure can't be worse than the disease. Remember that, Republicans? Remember when Donald Trump said that during the pandemic? Well, that applies to everything else too. And guess what? Just getting rid of everything and shoving it down to the states is not measuring twice and cutting once.
asking people to activate, and I'm not asking them to be a Stephanie Ruhle fan.
Krista chat. We need a scalpel, not a chainsaw. Exactly. And if you actually look, we need a magnifying glass or a microscope first before we use the scalpel. We need to see what the problem is. And then if we find the problem, maybe there are a few problems that can be dealt with the chainsaw. In government, buying tanks and planes for the military that doesn't even want them to pay back your campaign contributors, use a chainsaw on that. If you have tanks and just sitting in a parking lot, if you have jets sitting there on a tarmac, on an unused tarmac, just rotting away, wasting away, not being used, just because you wanted to pay back a campaign contributor, sure, take a chainsaw to that. I'll be the first to stand up and applaud that action. Won't applaud the administration because they suck. And they won't never do that either because I'm sure they want to keep their campaign contributors. They want to keep the military-industrial complex being paid off. So yeah, in those circumstances, sure, we could use a chainsaw, but that's an exception, and the exception proves the rule. Not use the pun because of Stephanie Ruhle, whatever. I've been disproving the rule, Stephanie Ruhle at least, this entire time.
But I'm just saying, I'm begging you right now. I don't care where you're getting it from. Know the source of your news.
Yeah.
Be informed and be engaged because.
And that first starts with having a news media that's going to inform, that doesn't abdicate their responsibility to inform. You need to prove yourselves trustworthy because in the past, almost 10 years now, you've proven yourselves to not be trustworthy. Because you do things like, you say things like, oh, these people need space. No, they don't need space. They need an education. And we need sunlight. We need spotlight. We need to put a spotlight on the bigotry because sunlight is the best disinfectant, at least on external surfaces. If you put sunlight in the body, that means you've cut the body open and you're probably dead. Donald Trump.
Because right now, we are living in such a moment of misinformation.
Just the other day, this guy I hadn't talked to in a long time, he sent me a text. He knew that my wife and I do work in Haiti in education. And they're like, can you believe this? I'm just so glad for the work you guys are doing. And it was like a little clip meme, and it had Chelsea Clinton, and it said, the Clintons got $85 million from USAID for their work in Haiti. They spent it all on themselves, and $3 million of it was used for Chelsea Clinton's wedding. And I immediately Googled it and looked at 10 news articles saying there's 100% wrong, zero proof of this. Here's how this little graphic meme, which looked very official. They're really good at making a little graphic where it looks like, there's a chart and there's a money and there's a spreadsheet and there's a shocked face.
Of course.
And I wrote the guy back. I'm like, dude, it would have taken you 10 seconds to just fact check this. And this is absolutely not true. Now.
Yes. Rainn Johnson, I agree with you on that particular point. You just tell the people, just Google it, look it up on the internet. A few seconds, you'd find that this was wrong. But the argument that Stephanie Ruhle's making is that you have to give those people space. No, you have to give them information. And when they come at you with false information, you have to tell them that their information is false. And explain to them why. And of course, that's why Donald Trump is flooding the zone. Because they're putting out so much false information out there, it's very difficult to fight all of it. Which is why we need all hands on deck. Which is why we need more liberal, progressive, leftist type media sources to be able to handle the amazing amount of misinformation that's out there. And then you need to have people in the media and in the upper echelons of the media, like the Stephanie Ruhles of the world, to say, no, you're wrong, here's why. And not tiptoe around it. Not sit there and say, oh, we have to give them space. No, tell them that they're wrong and explain to them why they're wrong. And maybe you say, look, I don't judge you for being wrong in this particular case. You were misled by an administration that is misleading people about many, many things. But here's how to see why they're incorrect. Here's where to look, and here's the information that you need. And if they feel insulted that you were, trying to correct them, again, as Andrew Gillum said, hit dogs holler. But people who are willing to actually understand that they made a mistake, that they shared something incorrectly, and are willing to change their minds, those people will be open to you correcting them. But if you take a strong stance and say this is wrong, here's proof as to why it's wrong, even though it should be the onus on the person who made the meme or whatever to say why it's right. Here's why it's wrong. And if that person fights back at that, then that person is proving themselves to be more and more unreachable and not somebody that we should concern ourselves with. We should concern ourselves, again, more with the people who are not out there voting, with the people who have been disenfranchised by the system, the people who are marginalized and oppressed and don't think the system is for them, and make sure that they know that we will make sure that the system is for them, that the system does treat people with equity, that does include people, that brings a diverse amount of opinions, because a diverse amount of opinions is the best way to get a good collection of ideas and figure out which one the best one is and go forward with that one. So yeah, I agree with Rainn Wilson there on that. I agree with him. But again, the Stephanie Ruhles of the world, at least to me, my opinion is that they would say, oh, give them space.
Did the Clintons probably waste some money in Haiti and waste money through USAID? Probably. Who knows what's really going on there? I've heard some rumors, but it's not this.
And yeah, who knows what's going on there? And why do we believe Elon Musk? That's the other thing. Ask them, why do you believe Elon Musk is telling the truth about this? Especially when he was wrong about condoms being sent to Gaza, the wrong Gaza, especially when they were wrong about transgender mice, transgenic mice. Give them all the examples of why they were wrong, and then tell them the story of the boy who cried wolf. And if they don't understand that the moral of the story is if somebody lies so many times that, you know, people stop believing them, that they need to understand that that's the moral of the story, because too many conservatives think that the moral of the story of the boy who cried wolf is if somebody lies, you should still believe them the next time, because what if the next time they're telling the truth? And if somebody believes that, they're probably unreachable.
Massive scale of corruption that funded Chelsea Clinton's wedding. But this is happening not daily, hourly.
But this is why this idea of like, I'm so much happier being disconnected and disengaged. I'm begging people, don't choose me.
They're disengaged and disaffected because you say things like we need to give these bigots space. Or we need to give the people space who are taking these bigoted positions because, oh, some of them might not really be bigots and some of them might be reachable.
I'm not saying tune into me at 11 o'clock at night.
I'm saying in the Tune in Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left, that's right, Mondays and Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Central here on liberaldanradio.com and twitch.tv/liberaldanradio. I'll say that. I'll say you should tune into me over to her. Because I'm not saying that we should give bigots space. I'm not saying that we should give people who support bigots space. I'm saying that we should, give people the correct information and firmly and strongly stand against the racism. And if somebody's upset that you're standing up against racism, they're more than likely than not a racist themselves.
Care more. Care about your news sources. Like when you were mad that the Washington Post didn't endorse a candidate, dropping your subscription doesn't help, right? You're mad at Jeff Bezos. You can take it out in different ways, but the journalists at the Washington Post are the best in class, and they're doing such important work.
Well, they dropped their Washington Post subscriptions, but they keep ordering Amazon one-click over and over again.
That's exactly my point.
So,
like you're still ordering your Amazon, and so I just think this is such an important moment of journalism, right? In the first week, the defense secretary.
Yes, it's an important, you're right, but you're wrong about why you're right. It's an important moment of journalism, and it's been an important moment of journalism for the last 10 frickin' years. But y'all have failed.
Secretary kicked out of sort of having a permanent booth at the Pentagon, kicked out NBC and MSNBC, I think the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN.
Josh in the chat says, I know plenty of bigots, and I know exactly how reachable each one is. Exactly. And I know there's been a lot of stuff in the chat that has been said and I haven't responded to, and I'll try and get to it afterwards. But again, I've recorded this whole thing. It's already an hour and 15 minutes of me discussing this tiny little piece of the clip. I've spent that much time talking about this tiny little clip and why they're wrong. Maybe I do bloviate a little bit. Maybe I do repeat a couple things extra times. But you know what? I have a lot of things to say about it. And yeah, sometimes maybe people have shorter attention spans, which is why I try and cut the clips up to be a little more succinct than this one currently is. But you know what? Sometimes the clips are going to go long.
In a number of organizations, but it doesn't mean that we're not covering them. I means we're not going to have a booth there.
It means you're not covering them correctly because you haven't been.
Think,
and you, the entire media as a whole, not necessarily you, Stephanie Ruhle.
Accurate news reporting is so important. And
yes, that's correct.
Know that people who are pushing misinformation want you to believe that it's not important. And the last point I would make would be when you talked about and they make it look really official. This goes back to where you get your news from, right? What we have to go through in terms of legal and standards is a huge mountain as opposed to social media, right? I could create a website today.
And you know what? I mean, that's having to go through legal and standards to try and get things out. Yeah, I mean, that's good in some cases. It's good that you want to be correct. But again, that's sometimes an excuse for them being overly pedantic with fact checking. I.e., again, if I say something about Project 2025 and I say it's going to do A and it's going to do B, and as a result of such it's going to do C, the fact checkers are going to be like, no, it doesn't say that C is going to happen, so you can't say that C is going to happen because of Project 2025. I'm like, no, I can say that C is going to happen because it's the logical conclusion of what happens after you do A and B. That's one of the problems with the media.
Called Patriotic Moms Who Love America. And I could create a Facebook group and I could write an article today that says, if your child gets milk out of the school lunch program, they're going to become a transgender, I don't know what, by the time they're 15. Okay? I could post that on Patriotic Moms for America, and it could go on Facebook. By Friday, when I see my mother on the weekend, and she'll say, Are you letting the kids have milk in school? Because I've heard terrible things about milk in school. and so the misinformation is real.
How do we fix this?
Because you have Donald Trump who wants to just, this is happening, so let's cut school lunch programs or whatever. Although you have RFK Jr. saying we need to fix the school lunch programs and get healthier food into that. But when Michelle Obama said that was socialism. That was communism. She was a terrible person for suggesting that we should have real fruits and vegetables and good, nutritious food in school lunch programs. She was horrible for saying that, but RFK Jr. says it. Oh, it's great.
There's been outcry about this for years, and it's not getting any better.
Well, it's not getting any better because, and I blame all factions of the government, we still have not regulated social media companies, right? The social media companies are bigger.
And how are you going to do that? If you don't tell the truth about why we need to do that, if you're not stern, if you're not firm, if you're not sitting there and saying, hey, we need to do these things for reasons X, Y, and Z, and we need to make sure that we do the regulation. You have to explain why, and you have to prove your point, and then you have to explain why the Republicans aren't going to let it do that, and why the Republicans want the misinformation to spread on social media. And maybe that'll get people to come out, and you have to be strong about it. But they're not. They're not strong about it. They're weak about it. Anyway, I've talked about this topic for far too long, and I have one more to talk about before I end the show. So we're likely not going to the phone lines today. But anyway, agree with me on what I've said so far in this video? Disagree with me? Leave your comments down below. Remember to like the video, share, subscribe to the channel. And unless you're a Nazi or think that the media is doing a hell of a job, have a good day.